I think the questions that intrigues me is, while Miles is engaged in his quest, he falls in love, works with other magicians, falls foul of someone from beyond the grave who is also hunting for transmutations. How important are these other characters?
They are important. It's not one of those books where the other characters are simply stooges to the hero, the protagonist. They are very, very important. He falls in love with Becky, and the way that she treats him is quite curious in a way, and makes the reader wonder what's really going on, because at one crucial point in the novel, on his quest for the book, the magical book, she abandons him. She disappears. So one's bound to wonder whether, as the narrative goes on, who really is his lover here? Is it Becky, or is it the book? The book seems to be reading him as much as he's reading it, and at one point it even reminds him, I didn't abandon you in the desert, and I'm not going to let you go now. So relationships of curious sorts are very important to the book. One very, very strange relationship is that an undead Glaswegian gangster called Kenny, who is trapped in limbo, needing to find a way either into the beyond or back to Earth, is also looking for the book because he hopes that it can bail him out of his rather strange existential prison that he's got himself locked into. And so he's pursuing Miles, who's pursuing the book. This is a kind of chase narrative throughout, and will appeal to people who like the idea of a chase narrative through exotic or interesting locations, Death Valley, LA, New York, London, and so on. So that's an important part of things for me, that the novel is very linear and it goes somewhere, and in that sense I'm a very traditional writer. This is a book with a beginning, a middle, and an end. In fact, I would say in some ways it's got about 3 endings. Not ones that you kind of choose from in the way that John Fowles did with The French Lieutenant's Woman. But, you know, people like endings, and so I'm not going to reveal them, but there is an ending, and then there's another ending. There's one ending which is to do with Miles's relationship with Becky, which goes one way or another. You'd have to find out by reading. There's another ending which is to do with the final true relationship between Miles and the book, and so on. And there's also the ending that isn't an ending, because at the end of the book there are trailers for possible sequels. Some characters hover, and you think, would I find that character again in volume 2? The answer will be in some cases yes, in some cases no, and there are characters who are in volume 1 who are absent from volume 2 but come back in volume 3. So this bears on the practice of writing and how I actually did the writing. I did a draft of this novel, You're Not Dead, in 2009. I then thought, I haven't finished, I would like a sequel. I wrote the sequel, Dream Crimes, and then this year I went back to You're Not Dead and rewrote it, having written the sequel. So this allows me to keep a number of things in play, and it turned out to be the right approach to writing a trilogy. Rather than writing one, writing another, and then the third, the going back has enabled me to build certain things in a way that I think makes the structure of the whole set of books a lot firmer. It felt when I went back that I was putting real foundations in a house made of dreams, that I was going back to that first draft, which was so strange and was itself a quest for me with an uncertain destination. And this time I was saying, get your practice of writing right here. You know, you've moved that mirror. It was on the west wall in chapter 1, now you've got it on another wall. Get it back where it should be. That ballast, that realism is very necessary. So in that sense, I think people would like this who like magic realism, not because I imitate Gabriel Garcia Marquez at all. I've only read one book by him, but there is magic in my work and there is realism. And there are also people who do this kind of mixture. Neil Gaiman, if you like Gaiman, I think you'd probably like my work. Tim Powers, you would like it if you go back and you liked Lovecraft. Or maybe most of all Ray Bradbury, who I think, like me, is a rather emotional fantasist. Something like Something Wicked This Way Comes meant a lot to me when I read it when I was young. And if I could give off some of that kind of strangeness and charm, I'd be absolutely delighted. Job done.
So for the reader, picking up the first book, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end, or multiple endings.
Yes.
And it's it's a traditional structure and linear in that way.
Yes.
But the actual writing is far more complex, not only across the first book, but across all three books.
Yes. So there are a mixture of things going on here. I need the realism as ballast to the more speculative side. If I just wrote speculatively, I'd vanish on some lost trail. I wouldn't come back to earth. So I need that balance all the time of verisimilitude, realism, the reader saying, oh yes, I recognise that. I've been to Cairo, it is like that, he's right. But if I just did that would be boring. I mean, that would be really dull, just to remind people of what they already know and where they've already been. So they might have been to Cairo, but they haven't been to Cairo and seen some of the things that go on in my book. So it's that constant defamiliarisation and refamiliarisation
going back
of the
and
reader.
forth.
They're going back and forth, which must never rest, but always have
Almost
the
like the
potential
writer is
to do
scout,
both.
going out ahead and figuring out what's happening there, and then coming back and making adjustments at the point that the reader is at. So
Yes.
the reader probably never gets the extraordinary complexity of the writing process from reading one book. They need to read all three.
Yes, the sequel is set in London and Paris and Cornwall and Texas and a spaceship. And by far the strangest of these 5 settings is, of course, Texas. So I'm taking the reader to wild and different and interesting places. I think you've got to want to travel in a way, mentally, if you're going to enjoy this kind of writing.
And you take Kenny on that journey with you, or he's taking you.
Yeah.
He arrives at all of these destinations.
He does. I lived in Scotland for 12 years, and I must have been imbibing and building up accents and stories and strange uses of words, and I didn't know that they were going to coalesce at some point and become this over-the-top character, this gangster who is also a sort of magician, though a very different sort of one to Miles. But that's also part of the book's comedy. I'd like to think that, of course, that there's art in there, but also broad, low comedy. I can be very vulgar and use things like the tradition of the carry-on movies and good old British innuendo as much as I can, poetic fantasy. All these things are true to life at some level, so it would seem important not to leave any of them out.
Is Kenny an imaginary friend?
I don't know if friend is the right word, and sometimes he seems quite real to me. I'll have to think about that.
Can you give us a little hint about what to expect in Volume 2?
Yes, the first book, You're Not Dead, is set around 1999. We're perched on the edge of a new century. The second book, Dream Crimes, it's 10 years later, and the banking crash has happened. So people's lives have been warped by this, and this leads into what to me is a very important theme. I want to beguile, and I want to please, and I want to charm, and I want to tell a story. But something under there which is dark, which is not the Gothic or horror. It's a different kind of darkness. It's the darkness that I believe we've gone wrong. We've taken a wrong turn. In the West, but also in the world. You can point to a particular war, or a particular catastrophe or seismic shock, like 9/11 or the Lehman Brothers collapse, but to pin what's gone wrong down on any one of these phenomena, let alone laid at the door of ethnicity or something like that, is to go chasing shadows, though with the potential to cause real hurt. But something has gone wrong, and my great fear, I have a feeling of foreboding. And W.B. Yeats wrote a poem in 1922, The Second Coming, and I would worry that some of those lines might be truer to 2022 than they were 100 years ago. He wrote, "The best lack all conviction, while the worst are filled with passionate intensity." We're there. And so that darkness comes into Dream Crimes. It's a comic novel, it's mysterious, it's got this and that going on, but that worry is in there and is absolutely central to it.
Do you think that the novels can help the reader? I'm thinking very much of young people as they're reading the novel, to explore some of the darkness in our lives at the moment and prepare them psychologically for what might be coming very soon.
I think that's bang on. I think it's friendly darkness. And so it's safe for the young reader to have the book lead them through some very dark issues and possibilities. We're all going to die at the end of the day, which is, Stephen King said there's only death and taxes. Actually, it's probably only death, really. And so reading about death in a sometimes gruesome or macabre way can be a therapeutic way of rehearsing for the reader for the actual final demise that we'll all experience. There are many other things going on, but that darkness, I agree. I think writing fiction
and also the
can be.
conversations around the books can, I think, help prepare people for.
Yes, and prepare them for all
The
sorts of
what ifs.
things. The what ifs. It's the conversations about your parents, about the past, about who you are and where you're from, about where you might be going, about do you want children, about would you want to be married, etc. Those basic life questions that the young person will encounter many of. If they can encounter them in the form of the novel, it can help. It can be a kind of role play. Through their imagination, their empathetic identification with the character, they might see something of their own possible future in there. And I'm not writing as an educator, but I think that books do educate, and that novels do educate, and that taking the reader out of their comfort zone is precisely what the reader ought to want to happen.
I have one last question. It's been fascinating to think about the novels and listen to you talk about them. So my last question is, can you imagine the novels as movies?
I can. They'd be rather expensive movies if we're going on location to Death Valley and LA and London and a spaceship and various other places. So in that sense, they weren't written with the televisual or the cinema in mind. But I try to write as vividly as I can, and I do try to depict people in a setting, in a place, which is also an actor in the narrative. The cities and settings and deserts in my work are actors as well as places. They're not inert. They cause certain things to happen rather than others. And in that sense, I think the books are very visual, and being inherently visual, therefore, if anyone watching this interview would like to stump up and film them, I'm sure we can come to an arrangement.
They are visual.